George Walker Bush, born July 6, 1946, is an American politician and businessman who served as the 43rd President of the United States from 2001 to 2009. He had previously served as the 46th Governor of Texas from 1995 to 2000. Bush is frequently referred to as George W. Bush, Bush Jr., or Bush 43 to distinguish him from his father, George H. W. Bush, who served as the 41st President from 1989 to 1993. Bush is the eldest son of Barbara and George H. W. Bush, the 41st President of the United States, making him the second son to also become president after his father, the first being John Quincy Adams. After graduating from Yale University in 1968 and Harvard Business School in 1975, he worked in the oil industry. Bush married Laura Welch in 1977 and unsuccessfully ran for the U.S. House of Representatives shortly thereafter. He later co-owned the Texas Rangers baseball team before defeating Ann Richards in the 1994 Texas gubernatorial election. Bush was elected President of the United States in 2000 when he defeated Democratic incumbent Vice President Al Gore after a narrow and contested win that involved a stopped recount in Florida. He became the fourth person to be elected president while receiving fewer popular votes than his opponent. In response to the September 11 terrorist attacks, Bush launched a war on terror that initially included the war in Afghanistan in 2001 and the Iraq War in 2003. He signed into law broad tax cuts, the Patriot Act, the No Child Left Behind Act, the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, Medicare prescription drug benefits for seniors, and funding for the AIDS relief program known as PEPFAR. In the 2004 presidential race, Bush defeated Democratic Senator John Kerry in a close election. After his re-election, Bush received criticism from across the political spectrum for his handling of the Iraq War, Hurricane Katrina, and other challenges. Amid this criticism, the Democratic Party regained control of Congress in the 2006 elections. In December 2007, the United States entered its longest post-World War II recession, often referred to as the Great Recession, prompting the Bush administration to obtain congressional passage of multiple economic programs intended to preserve the country's financial system. Bush was among the most popular, as well as unpopular, U.S. presidents in history. He received the highest recorded approval ratings in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, but one of the lowest such ratings during the 2008 financial crisis. Bush finished his term in office in 2009 and returned to Texas. In 2010, he published his memoir, Decision Points. His presidential library opened in 2013. His presidency has been rated below average in historians' polls, although his favorability ratings have improved since leaving office. George Walker Bush was born on July 6, 1946 at Yale New Haven Hospital in New Haven, Connecticut, while his father was a student at Yale. He was the first child of George Herbert Walker Bush and Barbara Pierce. He was raised in Midland and Houston, Texas, with four siblings, Jeb, Neil, Marvine, and Dorothy. Another younger sister, Robin, died from leukemia at the age of 3 in 1953. His grandfather, Prescott Bush, was a U.S. Senator from Connecticut. His father was Ronald Reagan's vice president from 1981 to 1989 and the 41st U.S. president from 1989 to 1993. Bush has English and some German ancestry, along with more distant Dutch, Welsh, Irish, French, and Scottish roots. Education. Bush attended public schools in Midland, Texas, until the family moved to Houston after he had completed 7th grade. He then spent 2 years at the Kincaid School, a prep school in Piney Point Village, Texas in the Houston area. Bush attended high school at Phillips Academy, a boarding school in Andover, Massachusetts, where he played baseball and was the head cheerleader during his senior year. He attended Yale University from 1964 to 1968, graduating with a Bachelor of Arts degree in history. During this time, He was a cheerleader and a member of the Delta Kappa Epsilon, serving as the president of the fraternity during his senior year. Bush became a member of the Skull and Bones Society as a senior. Bush was a rugby union player and was on Yale's first. He characterized himself as an average student. His GPA during his first 3 years at Yale was 77, and he had a similar average under a non-numeric rating system in his final year. After his application to the University of Texas School of Law was rejected, Bush entered Harvard Business School in the fall of 1973. He graduated in 1975 with an MBA degree. He is the only U.S. president to have earned an MBA. Family and personal life. See also, Bush family. George and Laura Bush with their daughters Jenna and Barbara, 1990. Bush was initially engaged to Cathryn Lee Wolfman in 1967, but the engagement eventually fizzled out. Bush and Wolfman remained on good terms after the end of the relationship. While Bush was at a backyard barbecue in 1977, friends introduced him to Laura Welch, a schoolteacher and librarian. After a 3-month courtship, she accepted his marriage proposal and they wed on November 5 of that year. The couple settled in Midland, Texas. Bush left his family's Episcopal church to join his wife's United Methodist Church. On November 25, 1981, Laura Bush gave birth to fraternal twin daughters, Barbara and Jenna. Alcohol abuse. Prior to getting married, Bush struggled with multiple episodes of alcohol abuse. In one instance on September 4, 1976, he was pulled over near his family's summer home in Kennebunkport, Maine, for driving under the influence of alcohol. He was cited for DUI, fined $150, equivalent to $660 in 2018, and got his Maine driver's license briefly suspended. Bush said his wife has had a stabilizing effect on his life, and he attributes her influence to his 1986 decision to give up alcohol. While governor of Texas, Bush said of his wife, "I saw an elegant, beautiful woman who turned out not only to be elegant and beautiful, but very smart and willing to put up with my rough edges, and I must confess has smoothed them off over time." Hobbies. Bush has been an avid reader throughout his adult life, preferring biographies and histories. He read 14 Lincoln biographies, and during the last 3 years of his presidency, he reportedly read 186 books. During his presidency, Bush read the Bible daily, though at the end of his second term he said on television that he is not a literalist about Bible interpretation. Walt Harrington, a journalist, recalled seeing books by John Fowles, F. Scott Fitzgerald, James Joyce, and Gore Vidal lying about, as well as biographies of Willa Cather and Queen Victoria in his home when Bush was a Texas oil man. Other activities include cigar smoking and golf. After leaving the White House, Bush took up oil painting. Military career. Main article, George W. Bush Military Service Controversy. See also, Killian Documents Controversy and Killian Documents Authenticity Issues. Lieutenant George W. Bush in the Texas Air National Guard, 1968. In May 1968, Bush was commissioned into the Texas Air National Guard. After 2 years of training in active duty service he was assigned to Houston, flying Convair F-102s with the 147th Reconnaissance Wing out of the Ellington Field Joint Reserve Base. Critics, including former Democratic National Committee Chairman Terry, have alleged that Bush was favorably treated due to his father's political standing as a member of the House of Representatives, citing his selection as a pilot despite his low pilot aptitude test scores and his irregular attendance. In June 2005, the United States Department of Defense released all the records of Bush's Texas Air National Guard service, which remain in its official archives. In late 1972 and early 1973, he drilled with the 187th Fighter Wing of the Alabama Air National Guard. He had moved to Montgomery, Alabama, to work on the unsuccessful U.S. Senate campaign of Republican Winton M. Blunt. In 1972, Bush was suspended from flying for failure to take a scheduled physical exam. He was honorably discharged from the Air Force Reserve on November 21, 1974. Bush took office during a period of economic recession in the wake of the bursting of the dot-com bubble. The terrorist attacks also impacted the economy. His administration increased federal government spending from $1.789 trillion to $2.983 trillion, 60%, while revenues increased from $2.025 trillion to $2.524 trillion, from 2000 to 2008. Individual income tax revenues increased by 14%, corporate tax revenues by 50%, and customs and duties by 40%. Discretionary defense spending was increased by 107%, discretionary domestic spending by 62%, Medicare spending by 131%, Social Security by 51%, and income security spending by 130%. Cyclically adjusted, revenues rose by 35% and spending by 65%. The increase in spending was more than under any predecessor since Lyndon B. Johnson. The number of economic regulation governmental workers increased by 91,196. President Bush signing a $1.35 trillion tax cut into law, June 7, 2001. The surplus in fiscal year 2000 was $237 billion, the third consecutive surplus and the largest surplus ever. In 2001, Bush's budget estimated that there would be a $5.6 trillion surplus over the next 10 years. Facing congressional opposition, Bush held town hall-style meetings across the U.S. in order to increase public support for his plan for a $1.35 trillion tax cut program, one of the largest tax cuts in U.S. history. Bush argued that unspent government funds should be returned to taxpayers, saying the surplus is not the government's money. The surplus is the people's money. Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan warned of a recession, and Bush stated that a tax cut would stimulate the economy and create jobs. Treasury Secretary Paul H. O'Neill opposed some of the tax cuts on the basis that they would contribute to budget deficits and undermine Social Security. O'Neill disputes the claim, made in Bush's book Decision Points, that he never openly disagreed with him on planned tax cuts. By 2003, the economy showed signs of improvement, though job growth remained stagnant. Another tax cut was passed that year. Between 2001 and 2008, GDP grew at an average annual rate of 2.125%, less than for past business cycles. Bush entered office with the Dow Jones Industrial Average at 10,587, and the average peaked in October 2007 at over 14,000. When Bush left office, the average was at 7,949, one of the lowest levels of his presidency. Only 4 other U.S. presidents have left office with the stock market lower than when they began. Deficit and debt increases 2001 to 2009. Gross debt has increased over $500 billion each year since FY 2003. Unemployment originally rose from 4.2% in January 2001 to 6.3% in June 2003, but subsequently dropped to 4.5% in July 2007. Adjusted for inflation, median household income dropped by $1,175 between 2000 and 2007, while Professor Ken Homa of Georgetown University has noted that median real after-tax household income went up 2%. The poverty rate increased from 11.3% in 2000 to 12.3% in 2006 after peaking at 12.7% in 2004. By October 2008, due to increases in spending, the national debt had risen to $11.3 trillion, an increase of over 100% from 2000 when the debt was only $5.6 trillion. Most debt was accumulated as a result of what became known as the Bush tax cuts and increased national security spending. In March 2006, Then Senator Barack Obama said when he voted against raising the debt ceiling, "The fact that we are here today to debate raising America's debt limit is a sign of leadership failure." By the end of Bush's presidency, unemployment climbed to 7.2%. In December 2007, the United States entered the longest post-World War II recession, 99, caused by a housing market correction, a subprime mortgage crisis, soaring oil prices, and a declining dollar value. In February of 2008, 63,000 jobs were lost, a 5-year record, and in November, over 500,000 jobs were lost, which marked the largest loss of jobs in the United States in 34 years. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that in the last 4 months of 2008, 1.9 million jobs were lost. By the end of 2008, the U.S. had lost a total of 2.6 million jobs. To aid with the situation, Bush signed a $170 billion economic stimulus package which was intended to improve the economic situation by sending tax rebate checks to many Americans and providing tax breaks for struggling businesses. The Bush administration pushed for significantly increased regulation of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in 2003, and after 2 years, the regulations passed the House but died in the Senate. Many Republican senators, as well as influential members of the Bush administration, feared that the agency created by these regulations would merely be mimicking the private sector's risky practices. In September 2008, the crisis became much more serious, beginning with the government takeover of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, followed by the collapse of Lehman Brothers and a federal bailout of American International Group for $85 billion. Many economists and world governments determined that the situation had become the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Additional regulation over the housing market would have been beneficial, according to former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan. Bush, meanwhile, proposed a financial rescue plan to buy back a large portion of the U.S. mortgage market. Vince Reinhart, a former Federal Reserve economist now at the American Enterprise Institute, said it would have helped for the Bush administration to empower the folks at Treasury and the Federal Reserve and the Comptroller of the Currency and the FDIC to look at these issues more closely, and additionally, that it would have helped for Congress to have held hearings. Education and health. Bush undertook a number of educational agendas, such as increasing the funding for the National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health in his first years of office, and creating education programs to strengthen the grounding in science and mathematics for American high school students. Funding for the was cut in 2006, the first such cut in 36 years, due to rising inflation. President Bush signing the No Child Left Behind Act into law, January 8, 2002. One of the administration's early major initiatives was the No Child Left Behind Act, which aimed to measure and close the gap between rich and poor student performance, provide options to parents with students in low-performing schools, and target more federal funding to low-income schools. This landmark education initiative passed with broad bipartisan support, including that of Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts. It was signed into law by Bush in early 2002. Many contend that the initiative has been successful, as cited by the fact that students in the U.S. have performed significantly better on state reading and math tests since Bush signed No Child Left Behind into law. Critics argue that it is underfunded and that NCLB's focus on high-stakes testing and quantitative outcomes is counterproductive. After being re-elected, Bush signed into law a Medicare drug benefit program that, according to Jan Crawford, resulted in the greatest expansion in America's welfare state in 40 years. The bill's costs approached $7 trillion. In 2007, Bush opposed and vetoed state children's health insurance program legislation, which was added by the Democrats onto a war funding bill and passed by Congress. The legislation would have significantly expanded federally funded health care benefits and plans to children of some low-income families from about 6 million to 10 million children. It was to be funded by an increase in the cigarette tax. Bush viewed the legislation as a move toward socialized health care, and asserted that the program could benefit families making as much as $83,000 per year who did not need the help. On May 21, 2008, Bush signed into law the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. The bill aimed to protect Americans against health insurance and employment discrimination based on a person's genetic information. The issue had been debated for 13 years before it finally became law. The measure is designed to protect citizens without hindering genetic research. Social Services and Social Security. Following Republican efforts to pass the Medicare Act of 2003, Bush signed the bill, which included major changes to the Medicare program by providing beneficiaries with some assistance in paying for prescription drugs, while relying on private insurance for the delivery of benefits. The Retired Persons Lobby Group AARP worked with the Bush administration on the program and gave their endorsement. Bush said the law, estimated to cost $400 billion over the first 10 years, would give the elderly better choices and more control over their health care. President Bush discussing Social Security reform at the Lake Nona YMCA Family Center in Orlando, Florida, March 18, 2005. Bush began his second term by outlining a major initiative to reform Social Security, which was facing record deficit projections beginning in 2005. Bush made it the centerpiece of his domestic agenda despite opposition from some in the U.S. Congress. In his 2005 State of the Union address, Bush discussed the potential impending bankruptcy of the program and outlined his new program, which included partial privatization of the system, personal Social Security accounts, and options to permit Americans to divert a portion of their Social Security tax into secured investments. Democrats opposed the proposal to partially privatize the system. Bush embarked on a 60-day national tour, campaigning for his initiative in media events known as Conversations on Social Security in an attempt to gain public support. Nevertheless, public support for the proposal declined, and the House Republican leadership decided not to put Social Security reform on the priority list for the remainder of their 2005 legislative agenda. The proposal's legislative prospects were further diminished by autumn 2005 due to political fallout from the response to Hurricane Katrina. After the Democrats gained control of both houses of Congress in the 2006 midterm elections, there was no prospect of further congressional action on the Bush proposal for the remainder of his term in office. Environmental policies. Main article: Domestic Policy of the George W. Bush Administration section Environment. Upon taking office in 2001, Bush stated his opposition to the Kyoto Protocol, an amendment to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change which seeks to impose mandatory targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, citing that the treaty exempted 80% of the world's population and would have cost tens of billions of dollars per year. He also cited that the Senate had voted 95-0 in 1997 on a resolution expressing its disapproval of the protocol. In May 2001, Bush signed an executive order to create an interagency task force to streamline energy projects, and later signed 2 other executive orders to tackle environmental issues. In 2002, Bush announced the Clear Skies Act of 2003, which aimed at amending the Clean Air Act to reduce air pollution through the use of emissions trading programs. Many experts argued that this legislation would have weakened the original legislation by allowing higher emission rates of pollutants than were previously legal. The initiative was introduced to Congress, but failed to make it out of committee. Later in 2006, Bush declared the northwestern Hawaiian Islands a national monument, creating the largest marine reserve to date. The Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument comprises 84 million acres and is home to 7,000 species of fish, birds, and other marine animals, many of which are specific to only those islands. The move was hailed by conservationists for its foresight and leadership in protecting this incredible area. Bush has said he believes that global warming is real and has noted that it is a serious problem, but he asserted there is a debate over whether it's man-made or naturally caused. The Bush administration's stance on global warming remained controversial in the scientific and environmental communities. Critics have alleged that the administration misinformed the public and did not do enough to reduce carbon emissions and deter global warming. Energy policies. In his 2006 State of the Union address, Bush declared, "America is addicted to oil," and announced his Advanced Energy Initiative to increase energy development research. President Bush delivering a statement on energy, urging Congress to end offshore oil drill ban, June 18, 2008. In his 2007 State of the Union address, Bush renewed his pledge to work toward diminished reliance on foreign oil by reducing fossil fuel consumption and increasing alternative fuel production. Amid high gasoline prices in 2008, Bush lifted a ban on offshore drilling. However, the move was largely symbolic because there was still a federal law banning offshore drilling. Bush said, "This means that the only thing standing between the American people and these vast oil reserves is action from the U.S. Congress." Bush had said in June 2008, "In the long run, the solution is to reduce demand for oil by promoting alternative energy technologies. My administration has worked with Congress to invest in gas-saving technologies like advanced batteries and hydrogen fuel cells. In the short run, the American economy will continue to rely largely on oil. And that means we need to increase supply, especially here at home. So my administration has repeatedly called on Congress to expand domestic oil production." In his 2008 State of the Union address, Bush announced that the U.S. would commit $2 billion over the next 3 years to a new international fund to promote clean energy technologies and fight climate change, saying, "Along with contributions from other countries, this fund will increase and accelerate the deployment of all forms of cleaner, more efficient technologies in developing nations like India and China, and help leverage substantial private sector capital by making clean energy projects more financially attractive." He also announced plans to reaffirm the United States' commitment to work with major economies, and, through the UN, to complete an international agreement that will slow, stop, and eventually reverse the growth of greenhouse gases. He stated, "This agreement will be effective only if it includes commitments by every major economy and gives none a free ride." Stem cell research and first veto. Federal funding for medical research involving the creation or destruction of human embryos through the Department of Health and Human Services and the National Institutes of Health has been forbidden by law since the passage of the Dickey-Wicker Amendment in 1995. Bush has said he supports adult stem cell research and has supported federal legislation that finances adult stem cell research. However, Bush did not support embryonic stem cell research. On August 9, 2001, Bush signed an executive order lifting the ban on federal funding for the 71 existing lines of stem cells, but the ability of these existing lines to provide an adequate medium for testing has been questioned. Testing can be done on only 12 of the original lines, and all approved lines have been cultured in contact with mouse cells, which creates safety issues that complicate development and approval of therapies from these lines. On July 19, 2006, Bush used his veto power for the first time in his presidency to veto the Stem Cell Research Enhancement Act. The bill would have repealed the Dickey-Wicker Amendment, thereby permitting federal money to be used for research where stem cells are derived from the destruction of an embryo.